And it was really odd. If I can just tell the story real quickly,
Of
because
course,
people
of course.
still don't believe it. Okay,
That's what we do. We tell
especially
stories here.
especially in today's day and age, because you get a notice and they show you out the door, and you got 10 minutes to get your stuff and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But the boss that I worked for, like I said, I kind of knew that my day was going to come where they were going to say, it's time for you to leave. Okay. Then when I started my own consulting company, they hired us and we did consulting work for them. So how many people get fired, get 3 months on the job, get severance, get hired as a consultant, get their company hired as a consultant, get
Two lunches,
luncheons in their
two luncheons.
honor.
Yeah.
I said, so people, I tell them this and they go, oh, you're making this up, right? It was still close where I could get back on the weekends to see my girlfriend, who's now my wife. So that had a big impact on
Who
it.
was at Rutgers, right?
Yes, who was that? Still at Rutgers. Yes. So
That's a little bit of a draw, just so we're clear.
there you go. Yes, yes. Yeah, because I also had I had been accepted at Penn State. I had a free ride to go through Penn State,
Oh,
and then turned them down to go to Lehigh.
yeah,
Which didn't make my parents totally happy. You could be the smartest person in the world. You don't know everything.
right.
There's somebody who knows something you don't know, and you may need that. So deal with that. There are people here to help you,
Yeah,
okay, who honestly want to see you succeed and will help you whether you ask them, and sometimes even when you don't ask them, they see you
yeah.
struggling and they lend a helping hand.
Did you know there's a technology that's actually an app on your phone that uses sound waves to tell your brain what you want your brain to do? We had a young man that was on a guest on our podcast, the Mike Litton Experience, who had a traumatic brain injury. He was sleeping 3 hours a night. He's using Newcalm now and he's sleeping more. Go to newcalm.com, Mike15 promo code. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. Mike is passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
Peter H. Christian, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. And like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So, with your permission, we'd like to start with where you were born, go up to today, and then we want to talk about these two amazing books that you've written. Thank you again for being here.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Appreciate you, buddy. So, where were you born?
I was actually born in Brooklyn, New York, in a hospital that no longer exists,
Oh, geez.
and lived in Brooklyn for about a year, and then my family moved. We bought a house, or my parents bought a house. I was a little young at the time, uh, in Queens, and I actually grew up in a place called Glendale, Queens, which is by Ozone Park, Rego Park, Jamaica, in that area for people who are familiar with the New York area.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I lived there until I graduated from college, and then I moved on. My parents were quite disappointed. I was kind of surprised because growing up in New York, which is part of the city, I always thought that was the place to be, and I would never move from there, and I have. So, so never say never, or never say that I'll do something and stay there forever, because it
So
doesn't happen.
they didn't want you to move.
No, my parents wanted me to come home and live with them and work in New York and all that stuff. And I had a job if I wanted it, but I said, no, city's not for me anymore. Time to move on.
Okay. So, can I ask you a couple of questions about growing up there?
Oh, absolutely.
What was your favorite thing about growing up in Queens?
I think it was the ability to, Manhattan was to us always New York City, even though
Yeah.
Queens is part of New York City. So to go into Manhattan, it was just an amazing place to be. It still is, with the theaters and the museums and the shops and the restaurants. Just a terrific place to be. I'm sure I've only scratched the surface of the places I was at. So I always thought that was terrific. And then there was stuff that was always at hand. I was big into sports. I played baseball and basketball, and I was always out of the house, involved in some sports activity. We had a schoolyard,
Mhm.
that I grew up in, and basically grew up in. I probably spent more time there than I did in my house. Uh, it was just the accessibility of things and the variety of things to do and the different people that you ran into. It was just a tremendous, tremendous experience, and I really enjoyed it.
What was your favorite sport growing up?
Well, it started as baseball, but after a while that got kind of boring because if you weren't the pitcher, you stood around a lot. So basketball, I loved, and I still love basketball because it was always constant action, and
Yeah,
I was a pretty good player.
pretty much
I
never
was a
stops.
guard, yeah, and I scored 30 points a game for my team.
Hey, there
So
you go.
right at the time, there was this other guy by the name of Pistol Pete. He took my moniker from me, if you remember Pistol Pete
Yeah.
Maravich.
Yep,
But
yep.
my teammates called me Pistol Pete too, so that was pretty
Oh,
cool.
what an amazing, amazing player and an amazing man, by the
Uh,
way.
yes,
So,
yes, and
in
I got
hi-
to see him play in Madison Square Garden. His team played in what was still the NIT at the time, and I got to
oh
see
my
him play.
goodness, that's
So that was
so
pretty.
cool.
That was cool to see. Yeah, he
That had
was
to have been an
terrific.
amazing experience.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we used to go to a lot of NIT games back when it was still a pretty big tournament. It was bigger
That's
than the NCAA at the time.
that's really cool. So, growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Growing up,
Mhm.
uh, well, I had a number of folks. I would say if I had to pick one, probably one of my college professors,
Mhm.
which I would still say I was still growing up at the time. He had been a consultant. He worked for a person called Lillian Gilbreth. If that name is familiar to you, she was married to I forget his first name now, but Gilbreth, who wrote the book Cheaper by the Dozen, and there was a movie made. He was big
Yep.
into industrial engineering, and he worked for her. The husband died. He worked for the wife, and he was in the Navy. He had tons of stories. But he was a brilliant man, brilliant professor, and I could relate to him. He put everything in very straightforward terms, very practical, and he was a great encouragement to me. He told me that I would do well in my career, and I would be very successful. So he was always encouraging. He was my thesis advisor,
Mhm.
so we worked hand in hand on my college thesis, and he was just a terrific guy. So if I had to pick one, I would pick him. But there were so many people growing up uh, that really had a big impact on my life. And we'll talk about one of the books, Influences and Influencers, and I name a number of folks in there who
Awesome.
I think,
In
yeah.
high school, did you have a favorite teacher?
Yes, actually, I did. He was a history teacher.
Yeah.
And it was funny because we didn't hit it off at first. He didn't like me for some reason. But over time, we got to grow on each other, and he became my favorite because he made history so interesting and he
Yeah.
made you think about it. It wasn't just facts and figures, but why did things happen and what was the cause because of them. His name was Mr. Ferraro, and I'll never forget him. He was just terrific, and he stayed even after I took his class, he stayed after me to see how I was doing. I went to a school called Brooklyn Technical High School, which is one of the big high schools in New York City. You have to pass an entrance exam to get in, and they only take so many kids throughout the city.
Hmm.
And
Cool.
he was terrific. He was outstanding, and I just really enjoyed him.
That's awesome. So after high school,
Yes.
you go to college. Where do you
Yep.
go and why?
Uh, I went to Rutgers University as an undergraduate, and the reason why was my father was an architect. He was doing work at Rutgers. I would go down with him and sit while he was having his meetings, and then we would go and we would play golf at the golf course. So he knew a lot of people. Rutgers was still a very reasonably priced school at the time because, again, I lived in New York. Rutgers is the state university in New Jersey, so it's more expensive for out-of-staters. But at that time, it was still fairly inexpensive for out-of-staters. I wanted to go to Stevens University. That was much more expensive. My father basically put his arm around me and told me if I did that, then my mother would have to go back to work in order to afford. So he convinced me to go to Rutgers, and I never regretted it. I mean, I had a great experience there. It's a terrific school. I met my wife there. We
Oh,
got
that's
married
cool.
there.
Good for
I
you.
have a great experience with it. I still have a relationship with them, so no regrets. But that's kind of the reason why I went there, even though it wasn't my first choice.
So your major in college was what?
Industrial engineering.
Gotcha. Okay. Why did you choose industrial engineering?
I wanted to be an engineer,
Okay.
and I went in thinking I was either going to go into electrical engineering or mechanical. Well, they had a 12, 13-week program where you each week you spent about an hour and they went through the curriculums of the different engineering programs. So I
Uh,
sat down at this one day called industrial engineering, knew nothing about it, had never heard about it. And by the time I got done, I was so intrigued that when I went home for the weekend, I said to my parents, I hadn't declared my major yet. I said that's what I want to go into, and the reason was that it dealt with people. All the other disciplines, in fact, the ones I was thinking of, they dealt with things. Okay,
yeah.
and you spend a lot of time, technical time in that. Here you got technical time, but you also got to deal with people, and that
Yeah.
really was intriguing to me because from there I moved on out of engineering into other aspects of my life. And I think that was a big reason was because of the background that I had going through as an IE.
So industrial engineering is more about the process
Yes.
and how you integrate that with people.
And you work with all the technical people.
Yeah.
Okay. So you got to know that stuff. I mean, I took electrical engineering courses and civil and mechanical. And so I got to know pieces of that. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I got to know and appreciate it and knew how to work with those folks to kind of put it all together. But it
Gotcha.
was the people aspect
So
that was
after
really
college,
interesting.
where do you go?
Well, I still went to college. I decided I wanted to get a master's. I didn't think that I quite had the knowledge that I wanted to have yet. So I went to graduate school. Now I wanted to stay at Rutgers now. Now that I was at Rutgers, I really liked Rutgers. And my advisor there, who also had a big influence on my life, he said to me, well, he says, quite honestly, we don't have the best graduate program. He says, so I really think that you should look at some of the other schools. He said, and we'll always have you back. He says, if you want to come back, we will find a spot for you and, free ride and everything. But I really think that would be good. So I looked around and I wound up with Lehigh University, which was about a couple more hours away in Pennsylvania. Had a great reputation. It was still close where I could get back on the weekends to see my girlfriend, who's now my wife. So that had a big impact on
Who
it.
was at Rutgers, right?
Yes, who was at still at Rutgers? Yes. So
That's a little bit of a draw, just so we're clear.
there you go. Yes, yes, yeah. Because I also had I had been accepted at Penn State. I had a free ride to go through Penn State,
Um,
and then turned them down to go to Lehigh,
yeah,
which didn't make my parents totally happy. But I convinced
yeah,
them that Lehigh was a much better school than Penn State. So
yeah. So your master's degree was in industrial engineering?
also in industrial
Okay.
engineering. That's where I met Professor Richardson, who I had mentioned to you before.
Yeah.
Work with Lillian Gilbreth and so
Wow.
forth.
What an impact he had on your life.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And I found the Lehigh Valley to be my home. And
Yeah.
we got married and we lived there for 40 years. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's so cool. What a great story. So after Lehigh and
Mm.
you've earned your master's, where do
Yes.
you go from there?
Well, I had a number of job offers. Like I said, I had one in New York City to work for Price Waterhouse. It wasn't
Yeah.
Price Waterhouse Coopers at the time. It was just
Right.
Price Waterhouse. They had an engineering division and they offered me a job and I had job offer from Colgate Palmolive and a couple of others, but I also had one in the valley with a company called Air Products and Chemicals, which
Mhm.
everybody may have heard of. Okay, big in gases and chemicals and so forth. And I kind of liked the valley. Didn't want to go back to New York. Didn't like the locations of some of the other places. So I said, yeah, Air Products looks pretty good. It was a growing company, and I had opportunity there. So I wound up working for them uh, and that was for about 2 years. And then I kind of ran into a roadblock and I moved on from there to another company, a little company, which I think everybody knows by the name of Crayola, and wound up there. So we stayed in the Lehigh Valley, and I worked for Crayola then after
Wow.
Air Products.
How long were you with Crayola?
About 17 years.
And
I
what
start
was your favorite thing about working there?
to see the kids come into the factory and see the crayons being made and the reactions they had.
Mm.
It was just, oh man. I mean, you could talk if you were, anywhere, and somebody said, "Well, who do you work for?" and you said Crayola, they automatically knew who Crayola was, and it
Mm.
was instantaneous conversation after that.
Mm.
Actually, it was called Binney and Smith at the time, so I'd say Binney and Smith, and they go, "You work for a legal firm?" and I go, "No, no, no, Crayola Corporation." "Oh yeah, we know Crayola." So
Yeah.
now they are Crayola, and in fact, they're owned by Hallmark, which is
Yeah.
another great company.
Yeah.
So it was really cool. But a neat thing about it was that throughout my career there, I was always able to work in a variety of different areas, no matter what my job is. So I knew basically everybody and everything that was going on in the company, from
Yeah.
sales and marketing to finance to human resources to manufacturing to research and development. It was just a wonderful experience. It was a great company. I had a lot of friends who I worked with and made some great relationships with folks there. And of course, the product is great. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody has grown up with crayons, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you make at some point you leave Crayola. Why did you
Yes.
leave and where did you go?
Well, it's not what I love to talk about, but even in the best of companies, you run into politics, and I ran
Mm.
into politics, and I wound up on the wrong side of one of the executive officers who basically I kind of knew at some point that my days would be numbered, and they were. Okay, I got the word, and it was really odd. If I can just tell the story real quickly,
Of
because
course.
people
Of course.
still don't believe it. Okay,
That's what we do. We tell
especially
stories here.
in today's day and age, because you get a notice and they show you out the door, and you got 10 minutes to get your stuff and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But the boss that I worked for, like I said, I kind of knew that my day was going to come where they were going to say, it's time for you to leave. Okay, and I said to him, "Roger," I said, "when you get that inkling, because they'll tell you first," I said, "just call me in and kind of, break it to me, and, I'll understand, and we have that relationship." So one day Roger calls me into his office and says, "Pete," he says, "I think it would be really good. Now, I'm now working in research and development. I think it would be really good if you explored other opportunities." Okay. Like what? And he says, "Well, you came from engineering originally." He says, "I think you would be great running the engineering group. And I've talked to the VP there and that, and you should talk to him and so forth." I didn't really like the guy who was in charge. But anyway, so I did. And it really wasn't going anywhere. So I'm sitting at my desk one day working, and I get a call from human resources. And the
Mm.
woman says to me, "Did you and Roger have your talk?" And I said, "Yes, I did." Or, "Yes, we did." And she said, "Well, when are you leaving?" And I said, "What do you mean, when am I leaving? I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere." She says, "Well, what'd you talk about?" I said, "Well, Roger said to me that I should explore opportunities, and I am. I'm talking to folks and that." She goes, "Well, that's not what you were supposed to talk about." And I said, "Well, that's what we talked about." She goes, "I'll get back to you." Okay. So a week goes by. She calls me back. She says, "Okay, we've discussed it, and you will be leaving. No reason why, but I kind of knew." Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, she says, "So you've got 3 months. 3 months. Have you ever heard of anybody that was told you're losing your job, but you got 3 months?
No.
Not severance. 3 months still working."
No.
Okay. Right? Never heard that, did you?
Right. No.
Okay. I'm still getting invites to meetings, and I'm going to meetings, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. One day, one of the people I'm working with calls me up, and she was very straightforward. She goes, "What the hell is going on?" "Well, what do you mean?" She says, "Well, are you leaving or aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, when?" I said, "Well, I guess I've spent the month, so I got 2 more months to go." She goes, "Well, what are you doing?" She says, "I see you at all these meetings and you're sitting in the front row." I said, "Yep, I'm making people uncomfortable." I
Hmm.
said, "Because they can't fire me. They already did. Okay, so I sit there and I just stare at them, and what are they going to do? You know,
Right.
so it, I had two luncheons. They gave me two luncheons. Have you ever heard of anybody who got fired who got two luncheons
No,
or a dinner? Okay, I
no.
got two luncheons. Okay. They then gave me my severance, which they tried to chisel me on that. It was supposed to be 2 weeks for every year. I had 17 years, 34 weeks. They tried to give me 17 weeks. I said, no, it's 34. Again, I knew all the stuff because I'd
Yeah.
worked.
Well, and
Okay. So,
you're an engineer, you know how to add, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So I left there. Okay. And we had a relationship with Lehigh University. I had graduated there. They had a department where they were doing consulting work. So I hooked
Hmm.
up with them and they gave me a job. So basically, I wasn't out of work. In fact, the year that I lost my job, I made more money than I had ever made in my life, which again is another story.
Yeah.
Um, I went back to Crayola as a consultant. So they hired me back as a consultant. Then when I started my own consulting company, they hired us and we did consulting work for them. So how many people get fired, get 3 months on the job, get severance, get hired as a consultant, get their company hired as a consultant, get
Two lunches.
luncheons in their
Two luncheons.
honor.
Yeah.
I said, so people, I tell them this and they go, oh, you're you're making this up, right?
Right.
I'm going, no, you
No,
can't make this up.
you can actually, right? There's
It
no way.
happens. So I don't like to talk about it. I just say we had an amicable separation, okay? And it was. I mean, I have no hard feelings. In fact, a lot of people were let go after me who did not have it nearly as nice as I did,
Yeah.
okay? But I had a great relationship with people, and I think they still
Yeah.
respected that. And I did my
Yeah.
job. Okay, so I didn't get fired for, not doing my job or doing something wrong or that because I did a lot for that company. But again, politics, you lose the politics sometimes, and that's just the way it goes. So I see it nowadays, with all the stuff going on in the government and that, and people are fretting about losing their jobs. Hey, that's part of life,
Yeah.
deal with it. If you're good, you'll find something to do and you'll move on. And I did. I did.
And sometimes it's a positive,
Oh,
right? Not always, but sometimes it's a positive. Sometimes it's an opportunity to grow, it's an opportunity to sharpen your skills, it's an opportunity to sort of reset everything, right? And in
well,
this case,
also, yeah, they gave me counseling,
yeah,
okay, as to what to look for. So the person I was working with was the one who suggested that I go into consulting. She says, "Do you realize that all the stuff that you were doing at Crayola was basically like internal consulting?" And I had never really thought about it.
mhm,
So I started to think about that. Also, I was networking, so I talked to literally 600 people while I was looking for my next employment. Okay, a lot of those people became my clients when I
yeah,
opened my own consulting firm.
yeah,
So all sorts of opportunities crop up. You just got to kind of look past the not so good to the possibilities, and a lot of good things can happen to you. And they certainly did for me. No
yeah.
regrets.
No, I totally agree with that. And so let me ask you this. When you
Mhm.
were going through that process, how did you feel?
Um, Actually, I felt pretty good. I had had 2 years to get prepared for the fact that I was going to lose my job.
Yeah.
So when I lost it, people said to me, "You're losing your job, and yet you're not like going crazy." And I said, "Well, first of all, you have 2 years to get ready for it." I said, "So what the heck? By then, so it doesn't come as a surprise."
Right.
I said, "And you're thinking about what you're going to do next." Okay, so that consumed me, and I was still working, and still doing stuff. I said, I kept myself involved.
Yeah.
And I reached out to people. Like I said, I talked to 600 people. I met some very interesting people as I was job searching
Yeah.
and found out all sorts of stuff. And a bunch of them became clients. So, because they knew about me. Okay. I didn't work for, I worked for them, but in a different fashion
Right.
than, being an employee of theirs. So, yeah, so you just take the positive with it. Yeah, there are times where it gets a little draggy. You want to get stuff done sooner. I'm never one to let things go for too long, but it all worked out fine. And my wife was a great supporter. We stayed in the
Mhm.
Lehigh Valley, and I hooked up with folks that I knew from before. So always maintain good relationship with people too. Do not burn bridges because you just never
Absolutely.
know.
No, it's
You
true.
never
And it's
know.
such a tiny world,
Oh,
right? You
yep.
start traveling in elite circles, it is so tiny. Did you know there's an app that has no side effects that allows you to use sound waves to tell your brain what you want it to do? It's called newcalm.com and it's amazing. It literally uses sound waves. If you want to tell your brain to go to sleep, if you want to tell your brain to recover, if you want to tell your brain to put you in peak physical state, if you want to tell your brain to focus, if you want to tell your brain to take a power nap, you can do all of these things and more with newcalm.com. Go to newcalm.com today, promo code Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off, right? You just need to, everybody's in this together. We need to take care of each other. So, looking back,
Hmm.
do you think that losing your job might have been the best thing that ever happened to you?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. I always wanted to be the president of a company. I wound up being president of my own company.
Right.
So what the
What was
heck,
it like? What was it like going back to Crayola as a consultant?
very weird
Yeah.
because people would come up, they didn't know quite what to say. Like,
We
what the
thought you
heck are you
left.
do?
We
Are
thought you,
you
right?
back
What are
here?
you doing
What are you
here?
doing?
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, and we would talk about old times and I knew the stuff already. Well, was how's so and so doing? Oh, they're doing fine. And I knew about the problems that I got hired back to work on because I'd been working on them when I was there. So it wasn't like I had a learning curve when I went there. A lot of places you go into, you have a learning curve until you figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
I knew what was going on at Crayola. I knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
So it
And
was easy.
it sounds like they were restructuring too. So they were offloading salary career people and they were and going back to hiring people as consultants. And people do that, companies do that for tax purposes and all kinds of different things. And oftentimes it works out for them. So
Yep.
yeah, that's really cool. What a great story. Thanks for sharing that. That's
Oh,
awesome.
sure. Yeah. So
So
thanks for letting me do that. Yeah.
oh, I love that. I just love it. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was you wrote your first book.
Yes.
There are people that are listening to this that are
Hmm.
thinking about writing their first book. You're actually talking to somebody who's in the process of writing his first book, right?
Okay.
Talk about the thought process that went into it. What was your frame of mind? How did you decide to start doing that?
Actually, it was while I was working. Okay. Because you come across all these different experiences.
Yeah,
And I would say to the people I was working with, someday this should be in a book. And they go,
there you go.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay. And I didn't write it down. I kept it in my head. All
yeah,
right. And I kept adding these different stories. In fact, I had to decide which stories I was going to tell them.
yeah.
And then when I finally retired from consulting practice and from the business world, and I was looking at, well, what am I going to do next? I
Mhm.
said, well, I always said I was going to write this book. Now's the time to do it. I got
Yeah.
the time. I don't have clients and deadlines and all that other stuff. So I started to write it, and I picked 12 stories, 12 different companies that I had worked with or for. Okay, each that had a lesson to it about the working and so forth. And I started to put the book together. Well, I
Mhm.
kind of got it together, and I wasn't quite sure what to do with it next. So I was involved with the local chamber of commerce, and I said to the lady in charge there, "Is there somebody who works with people on putting a book together and getting it ready for publication, all that stuff?" And she said yes. And she hooked me up with a woman who had written her own books and did that stuff. And she told me everything I did wrong. Okay. What can I say?
Yeah.
Uh, but anyway, we got it all straightened out and we got the first one. And it is What About the Vermin Problem?
Mhm.
And the name comes from one of the clients that I worked with who hit me with that question during one of our sessions together. But it's a collection of, like I said, stories from these different companies dealing with things like communication and trust and relationships and so forth, and how there's a very fine line between being very successful and being not successful, or you may even say failing, based on the decisions we make. Okay, for instance, if you don't communicate well, it can cause you major problems, and that's what happened
Yeah.
with this company. And the tagline of then, what about the vermin problem? Um, and I thought it was a good learning experience for people who are in business because they can relate to it.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no technical stuff in there. I do not use names of companies or people because I don't think that's important. It doesn't matter what their names are, it's
Yeah.
the instances that occurred. Okay. And learn from it. Okay. Because by doing a slightly different variation of what they did, they could have been very successful. And
Yeah.
instead, they turned out to be not so successful. But there's also success stories in there. Companies that did very successful things, including Crayola. All right. We were one of the first agile companies, okay,
Mhm.
or identified agile companies. Um, but if we had taken a turn in a different direction, we could have failed. So I think it's good to share with people about that stuff so that they can learn from it. So they don't have to go through the good, bad, and the ugly, which is what I called each of the different sections. Thanks to Clint Eastwood for that.
Yeah.
And hopefully they will get all good out of it. And if
Love that
things
movie, by
aren't,
the way.
excuse me?
Love that movie, by the way.
Yes, I know.
Big
Uh,
Clint Eastwood fan.
yes. Well, the book is almost as good as the movie, but
Yeah. I haven't read the book. I've only
okay. But
seen the
Clint, I
movie.
don't think Clint has either. So, but
Yeah.
anyhow, yeah. But you never know. You never know. We talked about how things happen. So he'll pick it up one day. He'll see that and he'll go, "Wow, that's really
Oh my
something."
goodness, that's
But people that
hilarious.
I've heard back from say, I can relate to that. I had that instance, or I know a person like that, or a company, or whatever. So we're all related, like
Yeah.
you and I were talking about. We share common experiences. It's a small world.
It's
I'm
unbelievable.
not unique in that regard. Okay.
Yeah.
These things happen to me. They're happening to other people too. Maybe not
Guaranteed.
the same 12, and same companies, but anyway, it happens. So we all get through it. So how do you deal with it? Okay.
Can you give us an example? I need context here.
Okay.
Because when I read the title of your
Yes.
first book,
Yes.
okay, my
Yes.
mind went a bunch of different places.
I bet it
My
did.
monkey brain, right, went
Hmm.
crazy.
Hmm.
What were they asking you? What was the context behind that question?
Okay. It was a company that was going to expand their operations. They make toothbrushes.
Okay.
And we went in to do a study to determine whether they should add on to the current facility or whether they should buy a completely new facility and start from scratch, whatever the case may be. And we determined that they could add on to it, um, have enough square footage to meet their demand for probably the next 5 or 10 years. And in that interim, they could decide what they wanted to do. So we did our studies, we got our information. It was like pulling teeth with them, and they kept changing their mind. But we finally got the stuff together and we went to make the presentation to them. Now, they worked in an old grist mill,
Mhm.
okay, that had been converted over to a factory. So we're moving stuff around, and where they had the warehousing, we were putting the manufacturing, and we were putting the manufacturing, the warehousing in where the manufacturing was and stuff. And we're right in the middle of the presentation, and the owner stops us and he says, "Well, what about the vermin problem?" And I looked at my partner and he looked at me and we said, "What vermin problem?" And he says, "Well, we're in an old grist mill. Yeah, we know that." He says, "And we have rodents in here." Well, there's a way to deal with that, a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
He said, "So if you put the manufacturing where the warehousing is, now this is where they store all the materials." He says, "That's where the rodents hang out." He says, "And we can't have them in manufacturing." I'm thinking, well, you got them in where all the materials are. That's not a good thing because what are
Right.
they doing with that? There's communication through this whole project, this whole process. Never once had it come up, "Oh, by the way, we have a vermin problem, so we need to deal with that too." And they hit us at the worst possible time, right when we're getting ready to put the close to the project.
Yeah.
So we felt bad and we said, "Well, we will take the information you gave us and we will redo it and we won't charge it. No, 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 that's okay. Well, it's not okay because I hate to leave anything unfinished.
Right.
They paid us for the work, okay, but they never went anywhere with it. They wound up in the same location doing the same thing at the same, it was very messy. But again, it got back to communication.
Yeah.
If you want people to do stuff for you, if you want them to help you, you've got to communicate. You've got to tell them the truth. You've got to tell them everything that's going on. Because if you don't have the information to deal with, you're going to make bad assumptions, bad choices, bad decisions, whatever the case may be.
It's kind of
So
like garbage in, garbage out, right?
oh, it was worse than that, I think. It wasn't even garbage. It was vermin.
Yeah. Well,
And
it was absent. Like they didn't give you the complete picture in terms of what their potential challenges were. So there's no way for you to give them an educated response, right? This
yep,
is something they throw at you that's a wrench in this deal while you're doing your final presentation.
yep. So and you'll find this out at some point. You got to pick out what the name of your book is going to be, and that just stuck with me.
Yeah.
And I thought that will be the great name for my first book. What about the vermin problem? And probably just like you, I've had a number of people I thought it was about extermination. I said, well, in a way, it kind of was. But anyway, so that was the genesis
Well,
of
what happens depending upon your frame of reference, right?
mhm.
What happens is you look at that question and you go, okay, that's the title of the book. Okay, what in the world, right? And so that's why I was asking you for the context because I haven't read the book, obviously, but I did see the title and I went, okay, I don't quite understand. And then the second book is influences and influencers, right?
Yes,
Will
yes.
you talk about that book for a second?
Sure. So as I'm working on the first one and we're finishing it up, the woman I'm working with says to me, so what are you going to do for your second book? And I looked at her and I said, excuse me? What second book?
I just got this one finished.
Exactly. I said, there is no second book. She says,
Yeah,
well, nobody ever writes just one book. So
right.
there you go.
Have you noticed
There you
that?
go. Get
Have you noticed
ready.
that? How many authors have you met that have only written one? And maybe it's the coaches, maybe it's the publishers, right? But somebody's going, no, 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 give me, right?
So start working on number two.
Be thinking about it, right? Be prepared.
So I started to think about it, and something that spurred me was there was somebody I knew who I had worked with back in Pennsylvania. I'm now living in Florida,
No.
uh, who had written a book, and I wasn't particularly thrilled. And then she decided to write a second book. And at that point, it spurred me, and I said, "Well, darn it! If she can write a second book, so can I."
Yeah. Here we
So
go.
all depends on what your inspiration is going to be.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I started to think about it, and I said, well, the first one talked about decisions. Well, how do you get to the decisions? How do you get to the mindset that you're at? Well, it's through the influences that you have in your work life, in your
Mhm.
life. You had asked me about what person influenced me most growing up. Well,
Mhm.
exactly. And I had a hard time to pick one because there were a number of people.
Yeah.
So now she got me started in the right way as to how I was going to write it. Okay. And I started to pick out those people who I thought had a tremendous impact on me,
Yeah.
and why I am who I am, how I think the way I think, why I do some of the things that I do. I'm not blaming them. I'm trying to give them credit for that. Uh, and how the same thing happens to you, and
Yeah.
how you should recognize that and appreciate it. Because I don't think we always appreciate people. They give us a helping hand when we didn't ask for it and when we least expect it.
Yeah.
And yet the outcomes are very, very good if they truly have your best interests at heart. And we should give those people thanks so that
Yeah.
they know that we really appreciate what they've done for us. Like the professor who told me, don't go here for graduate school because we really don't have a great program. Go somewhere else. Okay. We'll always take you back and we love you. Or Richardson, who told me, you're going to be very successful at what you do. And he was always encouraging and so on and so forth with the folks. So that was the genesis of it. Really, if I look at it, the second book should have been the first. What
Yeah.
influences us and why do we think we do? And oh, by the way, here's some things about people and who knows what their influences were, but here's the decisions they made and they weren't very good, or some of them were very good, or whatever the case may be. But it doesn't matter
Yeah.
in which order you read them. And the other thing is that you can take those things not just as a business book, even though they're supposedly written that way, but they're everyday life books.
Yeah.
Okay, we have people every day in our life who influence us and lead us into decisions. We do things in our everyday life, like communicating. Okay, and if we do it well, then we're very successful. And if we don't do it well, then we might struggle or be very unsuccessful at what we're doing.
Yeah.
So they have practical applications outside of just the business world.
Yeah. So I love this. And part of the reason I love it is we have sort of a thread that's started through all these podcast episodes. And I mentioned
Okay.
to you before we started that you're episode 318.
Yes.
The thing about it is we're constantly having conversations about mentors that have come in and out of people's lives.
Yes.
And they've been influences and influencers, right? They just like what your
Hmm.
book is about. And I want to make sure that I acknowledge something. How important it is that we have mentors in our lives. But what I feel like is even more important is that you and I, in honor
Yes.
of those people that helped us coming through our lives, that we
Yes.
help others.
Absolutely.
Okay. If we see something that needs help, we need to jump in and help. That's part of being a community. Okay.
Mm.
And it's part of, Hillary Rodham Clinton wrote a book called It Takes a Village,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
And I believe that in many different ways. And one of the things that I feel like people need to do is even if, and I'm speaking to everybody here, not just people who have accomplished a great deal, that kind of thing. We need to give back and we need to help. When we find a young person who's, going down a road that they shouldn't be going down or needs somebody to kind of help direct them. And by the way, sometimes it's the person on the outside that they respect more than they respect their parents, right? And they just
Yes.
need that sort of outside voice. They need that
Yes.
outside influence, right? And I've I've experienced that over the years, and I believe that I'm a product of a number of these mentors that have come into my life. And in honor of them, I believe that we need to step up.
Yeah.
We need to step up as leaders, and we need to be willing to sit with them. We need to be willing to hear them, and we need to be willing to help them.
Yep.
And so anybody that's listening to this, I want you to understand, it doesn't matter what you've accomplished in your life or what you think you've accomplished. There are a lot of people out there that are going to listen to this and they're going to think, I haven't really accomplished anything. So what can I help with? Well, the fact of the matter is, you've been on this planet for as long as you've been on this planet. You've learned things that have ultimately turned into wisdom, and you can share that wisdom with somebody that needs it. And
Yes.
I believe we need more of that, not less of it.
Yep.
So I wanted to acknowledge you for this, because one of the things that that I admire the most about you is the second book that you wrote, because it's all about how people can come into your life and influence and help you and help shape what your life is.
Yeah. Yeah, people ask me, if I were to give advice and I try to people getting started or whatever, what I would do. First of all, you're not in this alone.
Right.
So if you act like it, you're in for a hard time,
Yeah.
okay? Because you're going to come across other people. No matter how smart you are, you could be the smartest person in the world. You don't know everything.
Right.
There's somebody who knows something you don't know, and you may need that. So deal with that. There are people here to help you,
Yeah.
okay, who honestly want to see you succeed and will help you whether you ask them, and sometimes even when you don't ask them, they see you
Yeah.
struggling and they lend a helping hand. Take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And then again, be appreciative of what they've done and then pay it forward. All right.
Absolutely.
They helped you, you in turn help somebody else. So that's the way it should work.
Yeah.
And
That's
if you do
absolutely
it,
the
it
way it's
truly is
forward.
a village.
Yeah.
Okay. and you will be very successful, and you'll be very grateful at the end of the day. And you'll make a heck of a lot of good friends and contacts, and you'll learn a lot of stuff, okay? Even from people you may disagree with, you'll learn a lot of stuff. And don't be afraid to make a mistake,
Yeah.
because you learn from it and you don't make that mistake again. Okay. Unlike Monty Python, where he said we continue to make the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. Okay. You want to make a new mistake, but
Yeah.
don't be afraid to have a little bit of failure, because you learn from it and you move on.
Yeah. Take a little risk, right? It's one of the things that my
Absolutely.
grandfather absolutely just over and over and over said to me. He's like, look, growing up till now, and he's 97 when he says this to me. He said, I didn't take the risks that I should have taken. So
Yeah.
go take risks. Go out
Yep.
there and fall flat on your face, right? Tony Robbins says that, I think, best. When you succeed, you tend to party. When you
Yeah.
fail, you tend to ponder,
Mm.
right? We
Yep.
learn more from losing. We learn more from falling flat on our face than we ever will from winning.
Yep. Yep. Although in all the projects, and I still teach project management, I tell the class at the end, what you should do at the end of every project is you should have what I like to call postmortem,
Yeah.
which is you review the project and you review the things that went well so you can repeat them, and the things that didn't go so well, because every project has problems to it, so that you don't repeat them, and then share them with other project
Yeah.
teams and other managers and that, so that they learn from it. Okay. It's a learning experience. And
Yeah.
that's how you get good at what you're doing, is you keep doing it over and over again.
Yeah. It's rising tide lifts all ships, right?
Yep. Yep.
So where are you in Florida?
I am just north of Tampa in a little burg called Weeki Wachee.
Weeki Wachee. Okay.
Weeki Wachee, if you've ever heard, we are very famous for, we have a park here that has swimming mermaids, the Weeki Wachee mermaids. Okay. Yeah, so I am on the west coast of Florida in a beautiful area.
That's awesome. So do you know
Yep.
where Land O'Lakes is?
Uh-huh.
I
Yep,
lived
just
there and
south of
worked
here.
there. I lived there and worked there for a year,
Wow. Yep.
and I loved it. It was awesome. I
Oh
love
yeah,
Florida.
it's beautiful. It's beautiful there, and they're doing a great thing. They have if you're familiar with Tunnels to Towers, they're building a
Yep.
village there at
Yeah.
Land Lakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, we're trying to get Frank Siller on the podcast. So
Oh, that'd be terrific.
yeah, we're working on it. I'm
Oh,
working the back channels, right?
oh, good. Yeah, yeah. He'd
So
be
if he's
fantastic
listening,
to have.
Frank, we want you on the podcast. We'd love to
Oh,
promote
come on,
Tunnel to
Frank,
Towers.
sign up. Yeah.
We absolutely love what they're doing.
Yes, yep, yep. What he's doing, and now that he's building the homes for the homeless vets, that's just tremendous.
Oh,
You know?
it's amazing. Absolutely amazing what they're doing.
Yes.
I am so absolutely appreciative that you were our guest, Peter, on the Mike Litton Experience. Thank you again for your time. It was great to meet you, and thank you for sharing. This has been amazing.
Thank you very much again for having me. I appreciate it.
Can I ask you a question? Did you know that there's a technology that uses sound waves that'll tell your brain what to do? There literally is. It's called newcalm.com. It can tell your brain to heal, tell your brain to sleep, tell your brain to do all kinds of things. It can get you fired up. It can be a pre-workout. Newcalm.com. And the promo code is Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at the Mike Litton Experience.